I work at the Kettering Foundation as a program officer, and I kind of specialize in media and communications. And how I became involved with this work was simply starting to make issue videos, starter videos for NIF issue forms, and I ended up coming onto the Kettering Foundation to help them make their research more accessible to people who would find it helpful by taking more advantage of digital technology. NIF starter videos are the little trigger videos that people can watch to get them kind of engaged on the issue and start to present the options in a preliminary way, just for people who are different kinds of learners besides reading the issue guides, and just to also, in addition to laying out some of the options, try to really get people engaged on, you know, the deep values and concerns that are in play in an NIF framing. I started in public radio, actually, doing kind of community reporting, and then went over to work for public television and was doing some work on a farm show, and ended up from there getting introduced to Kettering Foundation because they work with our local public television station to produce those issue videos. And from there I ended up doing so much work for Kettering while I was at the public television station that it just made sense to bring me into Kettering proper. Well, at Kettering, I've moved into a research role, which is really interesting because I don't particularly have a background in research, but it's part of the Kettering ethos that everybody does research, and that the kind of research we do is not necessarily scholarly research, not all of it, or the kind of thing that you need to have a strict academic or social science kind of a background for. So I do some research looking for deliberative fragments of speech in everyday situations, trying to figure out how more of that can be cultivated. I also do some work helping out with developing curriculum that for school students to use that can help students come to see themselves as, you know, political agents and actors. I also do some work helping to look for ways to develop online deliberation, digital or augmented deliberation. But a lot of my work also comes with helping other program officers to think about the end results of their research. You know, they're doing this amazing research that can be really helpful to everybody from community foundations to regular citizens, institutions, grant makers, higher ed folks. And just making sure that all the information that we're gathering is accessible to people in a usable way that they can really make an impact with it. When people are discussing problems that are wicked problems that really probably need a deliberative way of talking about them to really truly address them, people aren't necessarily going to go through the whole process of naming the issue in a deliberative way and framing options for public deliberation and then holding a forum. That just may not be practical for regular people in everyday situations, but that there are probably ways where people can take the conversations that they're having and they know that they have this kind of a problem that is not going to be able to be solved if it, you know, breaks down into polarization, just ways that they can make their everyday conversations a little bit more deliberative so that the outcome that they reach, however they reach it, even in a very, you know, regular, messy, everyday fashion, will be more deliberative than if they kind of progress along the routes that you see modeled in regular politics or, you know, cable news, stuff like that. Kettering Foundation produces a lot of resources for the NIF, for the National Issues Forums Institute. So the issue guides and issue videos we produce. But the reason we do that is because we're very interested in studying the results of public deliberation. We're actually interested in studying what happens to citizens when they use these kinds of forums to discuss a problem, the kinds of judgments that they come to, and the kind of actions that they take afterwards, and the effect that it has on their sense of citizenship and active participation in public life. I do think that a lot of people do feel very sidelined from politics, like there's really very little that they can do to really make a decision or to really shape their own futures. We've recently been reading The Work of Hope by Rich Harwood, which Dr. Matthews of the Kettering Foundation contributed the foreword to, and he talks about people feeling bereft, as if the world has changed completely around them. There's very little to trust in. There just doesn't seem to be any avenue or anybody to reach out to get some control back over our lives, over the problems that are too big for us to take, for the problems that do require more than just individual action. You know, people feel very isolated that individual action is the only kind of action they can take, but that's not enough to solve certain kinds of problems, you know, that we all do face and share. And I do think that people feel a lot of times very sidelined by this, sidelined by institutions that are so professional that, you know, they kind of have their business and know it, and, you know, they certainly want citizens to approve, but not really be integral actors in that. And, you know, obviously we know that, you know, the government seems to be operating completely in a vacuum without much input or participation by citizens. And if you think about what can citizens do, well, you can vote. You can sign up the petitions that show up in your emails if you click on activist websites and get on their mailing list. You can certainly donate money, but I think that there's certainly a hunger for the ability to do something more than vote. Even to vote with your dollars doesn't really seem to be, shouldn't there be more to citizenship than that? I think that a lot of people feel this way, but a lot of people are also just struggling to see what can be done. And it seems like some of the brightest opportunities do tend to be in local efforts where people really feel like they can come together with their neighbors and try to figure out a way to solve some of these problems. So I do think that's why deliberation is key. There are certain kind of problems, everything from how a community can stay resilient in the face of disasters, to school reform, to poverty, all these kinds of really difficult problems where people have different ideas about how the problem came to be and what you should really do if you want to address it, that it's really important that people are able to come together and figure out a way productively to work together on solving these problems. And with any luck, hopefully, citizens becoming more active, I do think that people who have taken part in these kind of processes and had even a small success do lose that sense that there's nothing they can do, that they're completely sidelined and there's no way to get back in, and that they're at the mercy of forces beyond their control. Deliberation is hard work. And people don't try it until they pretty much failed using other options, I think. I mean, if you think that you can solve a problem by just kind of marshaling the like-minded folks to go ahead and attack it, why wouldn't you go for that? It makes perfect sense to do so. As to why I think it necessarily hasn't gone mainstream, it's not as attractive. It's not a simple, for one thing, it's not a method. It's not a technique, It's a practice that people can already do in their everyday lives. I mean, individuals deliberate every day, but the idea of doing it with other people when there are so many other forces in our culture that are, breaking down relationships and eliminating public spaces and all those kind of things make it really difficult. It's hard work. It requires space and time to do. It's not an easy option to pursue, and it also is antithetical to the current political culture of interest politics. It doesn't operate that way, and if you don't have a bunch of partisans marching on your side, if you can't hook into that kind of action, then it can be difficult to get media attention or be studied by the mainstream culture. You just don't come to their attention because it doesn't hook into things that they think they understand. And I mean, even when it has been heard of, it's a lot of times misunderstood. Sometimes people even have bad experiences with deliberation where they think that it doesn't necessarily result in anything. And so people can have negative experiences and they kind of tie all, community work with those messy, horrible public town hall meetings, As for ways that we can make this work more mainstream, I think that we have to make it clear to people that there are certain kinds of problems that just can't be solved by any amount of individual action or even just like-minded groups working together. The problem is that people disagree about what should be done, and until you can do something about those disagreements and figure out what to do and acknowledge the fact that even whatever you do will have trade-offs, and are you okay with accepting those? And from there, go into, okay, well, so what are the resources that we can marshal to kind of make this happen? And how can we maximize them so that we have the most impact on this problem? But it's just a matter, I think, of making that work visible. How to make it worthwhile to people and how to make people see the efficacy of it is, I think, a challenge for all of us in the network. A lot of times people are skeptical of it. They think it sounds very pie in the sky and nice to think that people would participate in these forums, but they don't really see how it could be, how it could be nearly as powerful as a lobbyist with a lot of money or, a big powerful institution that's going to run on its own theories of change no matter what, citizens have to say about it. And I have to say that they are, to a large extent, probably right in today's climate. But I don't see that ever changing unless people do get together and figure out ways that they can try to get some control over their future. Well, about the idea that politicians should be the ones to initiate, this kind of deliberative public. I think there's that famous line about if we waited for Washington to sow wheat, we'd probably never have any bread. I can't remember exactly how that quote goes. And I think that if you waited for policymakers to start initiating what we would call true and authentic deliberative processes, not just citizens, giving input to policies that they've already designed, or, pretty much just giving a little bit of feedback at some point. If you were waiting for the government to do that, I think you'd be waiting a while. But on the other hand, I do think that there has to be, that we can't just have a completely grassroots participation that doesn't kind of begin with, if you do want to have any impact on policy, I do think you probably need to begin with that end in mind and try to figure out a way that it could be in the self-interest of a policymaker or politician to pay attention to what a deliberative public is doing and how they're engaging the issue. I think that's the key part. I mean, right now with the current electoral politics model, it doesn't make a lot of sense. People are really worried about rallying their base and getting that certain sliver of independence that they need to just carry them over the mark. And so this is completely antithetical to that model, to bring more people and make them engage in the system, and even more than approving a certain policy or a certain kind of issue, just the idea that citizens have a lot more to do than simply vote for somebody and receive services it does not fit in with the current political culture as it is. So I think that it will have to be started by citizens. It just has to be. There's no reason for a politician to do this. If they're thriving to today's climate, they're doing so because they figured out a method that works, and they don't need this. But we do have to figure out, if we really want to have an impact on policymakers, I do think we have to either figure out some way that it's in their self-interest to become engaged in this process, or some other way of changing the process from underneath them. Yeah, I do think that it's important for us to have a way that people can just kind of basically get started. And I think this is where it's important to make sure that there are just places in every community across the country where somebody has some experience dealing with wicked problems through some kind of deliberative method. And I think that there are certain problems that can probably be best be addressed through sustained dialogue, other ones that are probably best addressed through deliberation, and there are different flavors of that. And I think that certainly whatever people are most comfortable with, whatever resonates most with them, should be probably the approach they should pursue. There are certainly things that I love about the NIF style of deliberation, which is that it really focuses on the trade-offs. That's the crucial thing about it, that if people use that way of coming to a judgment, they will not only have decided, what's important to them, what concerns they really have that really need to be taken into account, but also that, okay, so based on that, we're going to do this. That's inherently going to have a trade-off, but I am okay with that. Or I'm not. We have to think of something else that we can do to address this problem. I think it really provides a sound foundation for any kind of action on a problem. I hope that democracy will be healthier than it is now. I think that the growth of the Deliberative Democracy Network can certainly only be an aid to that if it keeps growing as authentically and organically as it has been now, and doesn't become, just another process to do for the sake of doing, and doesn't become, democracy light. But if it stays authentic to what it came out of, which is the goal of allowing citizens to take some control over their lives, to be able to work together when they need to. People don't tend to walk away from this because they don't like it. People who have any success with it love that it gives them some control over their lives. And so I think that if it continues to grow the way it has been, which is not, slow by any means, it's, grown exponentially over the last 30 years, then I think that the more people that are doing that, hopefully by 2020 a lot more people are doing that, and we should be able to see some more tangible results.